My son-in-law's father called my daughter a bookkeeper's kid, said she'd married up, said the Ashworth name would lift her out of whatever small life she'd been raised in. I didn't argue. I didn't even put down my teacup. I just nodded the way you nod at someone who is digging a hole they don't yet know they're standing in. What that man didn't know, what none of them at that Rosedale dinner table knew, was that I had been quietly buying into Ashworth Holdings since the spring of 2019, and the line of credit his entire operation ran on belonged to a numbered company in Halifax that answered to me. I saw her from the parking lot of the Tim Hortons at Bronson and Carling, November in Ottawa, the kind of gray afternoon that doesn't really commit to either rain or snow, so it does both at once. She was sitting in her car with the engine off and the windows fogging up, and my grandson was in the back seat in his school uniform from Ashbury, still buckled in, holding his little sister's hand. 3 suitcases in the trunk. I could see them through the rear window because the hatch hadn't closed all the way. She'd loaded the car in a hurry, the way you load a car when you have decided something but haven't yet given yourself permission to say it out loud. My grandson is 7. My granddaughter is 4. He was looking at the back of his mother's headrest like it was a problem he was supposed to solve. The little one was eating the last of a Timbit and watching the snow. I parked beside her. I did not knock on the window. I just stood there in my coat with my hands in my pockets until she looked over and saw me. The look on her face was not surprise. It was the look of a person who has been holding her breath for so long, she has forgotten how to let it out without breaking. She rolled the window down. "Mum," she said. That was all. I walked around to the back seat first. I always do. I unbuckled my granddaughter and she lifted her arms to me the way she has since she was a baby, and I held her against my coat and smelled her hair, which smelled like the shampoo I had bought her for her birthday, and like crayons, and like the inside of a car that has been driven too far without stopping. My grandson didn't lift his arms. He just looked at me, and his eyes were his father's eyes, which I have never held against him, and he said, "Grandma, Mum says we're not going home." "That's all right, sweetheart," I said. "Grandma's house is home too." I told my daughter to follow me. I drove ahead and she drove behind, and the whole way back to Rockcliffe I watched her in my rearview mirror. She kept both hands on the wheel. She didn't cry. She had cried herself out somewhere between leaving the house in Rockcliffe Park she had lived in for 9 years and the parking lot where I had found her. By the time we pulled through my gate, the snow had decided to be real snow. My grandchildren ran into the front hall the way they always do, ahead of their mother, and my housekeeper, who has been with me 26 years, was already in the kitchen with the kettle on because I had texted her from the parking lot and she does not ask questions. She just understood. I made up the room with the bunk beds. I put my granddaughter in the lower bunk with the quilt my mother had sewn in 1971, and I read her 2 stories, and I told her that the squirrels in Grandma's yard had names and that we would learn them all in the morning. My grandson climbed up to the top bunk on his own and lay on his back looking at the ceiling. I sat on the edge of his bunk and put my hand on his shoulder. "Dad's not coming, is he?" he said. I have learned in 63 years that there are moments when a lie is a kindness, and moments when a lie is the beginning of every wound a child will spend the rest of his life trying to close. I knew which kind of moment this was. "I don't know yet, sweetheart," I said, "but you and your sister are safe with Grandma, and that's the only thing you need to know tonight." He nodded. He closed his eyes. He did not cry, which was harder to watch than crying would have been. I went downstairs. My daughter was sitting at the kitchen island with her hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from. I sat across from her. "Tell me," I said. She told me. It came out the way these things come out, not in order, looping back, correcting itself. The kind of story a person tells when she has been rehearsing it in her head for months and is only now allowed to say it. His mother had gone to the firm, not Wright himself, but his mother, the matriarch, the woman who had cornered me at the Christmas dinner in 2018 and asked me what my late husband had done for a living in that voice that was not asking. She had gone to the senior partners at Bryden Macaulay, where my daughter had been a junior associate for 4 years, and she had produced documents. emails my daughter had supposedly sent to a client about restructuring a trust, communications that suggested my daughter had been advising the client to move funds in ways that benefited her personally. The documents were on the firm's own letterhead. The signatures were hers. The dates lined up. The senior partners had pulled her into a meeting on a Thursday afternoon and told her she was on administrative leave pending an internal investigation and that she should not return to the office. She had gone home that night and told her husband. And her husband, my son-in-law, the boy I had walked down the aisle to meet her at the altar 9 years ago, had looked at the documents his mother had handed him and said in a voice my daughter described as gentle, "Sweetheart, I think we both know you've been under a lot of pressure." He said I might have done it and forgotten, she said, and her voice cracked then for the first time. He said maybe I'd been drinking again. I haven't had a drink in 5 years, Mom. He knows that. I did not say anything for a moment. I drank my tea. I watched her press the heels of her hands into her eyes, the way she used to do when she was 8 years old and overtired. "How long?" I said. "Has he been telling you that you don't remember things correctly?" She looked up. She didn't answer right away. "About 3 years," she said. "Maybe 4. I nodded. I set down my cup. "All right," I said. "Go upstairs, sleep in the green room. I'll see to the children if they wake." She stood. She did not move toward the stairs. She stood there for a moment looking at me, and then she said very quietly, "Mom, what are you going to do?" I looked at her. My daughter, 41 years old. The girl I had raised alone after her father died of a heart attack in the lobby of the Chateau Laurier in 1989 when she was 4 years old and I was 32. And I had nothing but a paralegal certificate from Algonquin and a mortgage I did not know how to pay. The girl I had put through Queens, the girl I had watched build a career, a marriage, a family, all of it pieced together from her own quiet competence and the bones of what I had taught her about not asking permission to take up space in a room. "I'm going to make a phone call," I said, "and then I'm going to make breakfast." I made the phone call from my study at 11:05 that night. My lawyer, who was also one of my oldest friends, answered on the second ring. Her name is the kind of name I am not going to put into this story because she has asked me in the years since to keep her out of the part of it that gets retold. She listened. She did not interrupt. When I was done, she said, "How much of it have you already documented?" "All of it," I said, going back to the engagement. "How much time do you need?" 10 days, I said. "I want to finish before the foundation dinner." She was quiet for a moment. The foundation dinner she knew about. Everyone in the Ottawa-Gatineau corridor with any kind of philanthropic profile knew about it. The Ashworth Foundation annual benefit, held every November at the National Gallery, raising funds for cardiac research at the Heart Institute. My son-in-law's mother chaired it. She had chaired it for 11 years. This year, she was scheduled to be honored for her service. 10 days, my lawyer said. "I'll be there at 7 tomorrow morning. Don't let her talk to anyone, especially him." I hung up. I sat at my desk for a long time looking out the window at the snow, which had started to fall in earnest now. The kind of November snow that does not yet know it is going to stay until April. I thought about my husband, who had been dead now for 34 years, longer than he had been alive. I thought about what he would have said about all of this. He had been a quiet man. He had been an accountant. He had taught me before he died that the only revenge that lasts is the kind that does not look like revenge. It looks like paperwork. It looks like patience. It looks like a woman who has been smiling politely at someone for 3 years because she has known all along that she owned the ground they were standing on. I had bought into Ashworth Holdings the way you buy into anything when you do not want to be noticed, through a numbered company, through a holding structure registered in Halifax, through a firm that had handled my late husband's estate. I had started in 2019, 6 months after my daughter's engagement, when I had finished my own quiet research into the family she was about to marry into. What I had found in 2019 was not enough to stop the wedding. It was a pattern of small things. A first wife who had left under a non-disclosure agreement, a sister-in-law who had been bought out of a partnership in a way that did not quite make sense on paper, A mother who had a reputation in Rosedale circles of being charming in public and cold-blooded in private. None of it was criminal. None of it was the kind of thing you tell your daughter when she is glowing and showing you her ring. But it had been enough to make me start positioning. By 2022, I owned 18% of Ashworth Holdings through 3 layers of corporate structure. By 2024, I owned 31%, and I had acquired the operating line of credit they used to finance the holding company's quarterly distributions. They did not know any of this. They had no reason to know. The numbered companies had names like initials and numbers. The signatures on the lending documents belonged to officers of a Halifax trust company who had been paid, modestly and legally, to act as my agents. My son-in-law's father, the patriarch, the man who had called my daughter a bookkeeper's kid, ran the firm out of a heritage building on Sparks Street. The Ashworth name was on the door. He believed, the way men of his generation believe, that what was on the door was the same as what was inside the walls. He was about to learn the difference. My lawyer arrived at 6:53 the next morning. We sat in my kitchen, and I poured coffee, and she opened her laptop. And over the next 4 hours, we built out a timeline. Every email I had been forwarded by my daughter over the past 3 years, every photograph I had taken at family gatherings where I had quietly noted what was said and by whom. Every receipt my daughter had given me, from the period when her husband had started moving their joint accounts into instruments that required his signature to access. By 11 that morning, we had a folder thick enough to lean a coffee mug against. By noon, my lawyer had called a forensic accountant in Toronto, a woman she had used twice before, and the woman was on a train. My daughter came down to the kitchen at 12:30. She was wearing a pair of my old pajamas. The children were upstairs watching something on a tablet. She poured coffee. She sat down at the table. She looked at the folder. She did not ask what was in it. "Sweetheart," I said, "I need you to tell me about a woman named Wren McIntyre." She looked up. She blinked. "How do you know that name?" "I know a lot of names," I said. "I want you to tell me what you know." She knew very little. Wren McIntyre had been engaged to my son-in-law in 2014 before he met my daughter. The engagement had ended quietly. My daughter had been told by him that it had been a mutual decision, that they had been too young, that Wren had wanted something he hadn't been ready to give. My daughter had met her once, briefly at a charity event in 2017, and had thought she seemed nervous in a way that had not made sense at the time. "I want to call her," I said. My daughter was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mom, what are you doing?" "I'm finding out," I said, "whether what happened to you is the first time or whether it is part of something." She looked at the folder. She looked at me. She nodded. "I called Wren McIntyre that afternoon. She lived in Conata that afternoon. She lived in Conata now. She had remarried. She had a 6-year-old. She listened to me explain who I was and who my daughter was, and there was a silence on the line so long I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, "I have been waiting 11 years for someone to ask me about this." She came to my house that evening. She was a small, careful woman in her late 30s, with the kind of straight posture you develop when you have spent years not letting anyone see that you are afraid. She sat in my living room and drank tea and told me, slowly and precisely, what had happened to her. She had been 26 when she had met my son-in-law. He had been charming. He had been attentive. He had moved her into his condo in the Glebe within 4 months. By month 7, she had stopped seeing 2 of her closest friends. By month 9, she'd begun apologizing to him for things she could not remember doing wrong. By month 10, he had taken her aside one evening and told her, gently, that she had been forgetting things, that she had been saying things to his mother that she then denied saying, that perhaps she should see someone. She had not seen someone. She had broken the engagement and moved back in with her parents in Barrhaven for a year. And during that year, she had received a letter from a lawyer demanding the return of an engagement ring she had already returned and a sum of money, just over $14,000, that he claimed she had taken from a joint account. She had not taken it. She had paid the $14,000 because her mother had been ill at the time and she had not been able to fight. There was a third woman, Wren said, after me, before your daughter. Her name was Adela Tessier. She's in Montreal. I don't know if she'll talk to you. I made notes. The forensic accountant arrived from Toronto the next morning. She spent 2 days with the documents my daughter had brought and another 2 days with the additional documents my lawyer had subpoenaed through a process I am not going to describe in any detail because it involved a judge whose name I am also not going to mention. By the end of the week, we had what the accountant called a high competence finding. The emails attributed to my daughter had been generated by someone with access to her firm credentials, but not by her. The metadata was wrong. The IP addresses traced back to a workstation in the Ashworth Holdings office on Spark Street. The dates lined up with periods when my son-in-law's mother had been visiting the firm's office, ostensibly to consult with her son. She had forged my daughter's emails on her son's computer on a workstation registered in his name in a building that belonged to a numbered company that belonged to me. I sat with that fact for a long time. I sat with it the way you sit with the piece of evidence you have been waiting for, knowing all along it would arrive, and finding, when it finally does, that knowing is different from holding it in your hands. I called Adele Tessier in Montreal on the 8th day. She spoke to me in French, which I have not used regularly since I lived in Hull as a young woman, but I followed enough. She had been engaged to him in 2016. The engagement had ended after 11 months. There had been a letter. There had been a demand for money. There had been a year of her life she described as la brume, the fog during which she had genuinely believed she might be losing her mind. She agreed to come to Ottawa for the foundation dinner. She did not ask why. She seemed to understand. The Ashworth Foundation annual benefit was held on a Saturday evening in the second week of November at the National Gallery of Canada. Black tie. 500 guests, every name in the Ottawa philanthropic community, plus a contingent flown in from Toronto and Montreal. My son-in-law's mother was being given a Lifetime Service Award for her contributions to cardiac research, an award the foundation had created the previous year for the express purpose of giving it to her. I bought 4 tickets at the door. I had not been a regular guest at previous benefits. I had been invited every year as a courtesy since my daughter's wedding. I had always sent a polite check and a polite regret. This year, I had told my son-in-law's mother 3 days earlier by hand-delivered note that I would be attending in support of the family. She had sent back a note thanking me and expressing her delight. I wore a black dress I had bought at Holt Renfrew on Bloor Street in Toronto in 1998, a dress my husband had never seen me wear because he had died 9 years earlier, a dress I had kept all these years for the kind of evening I had never quite been able to picture. I wore my mother's pearls. My daughter wore deep green. Ren McIntyre wore charcoal. Adele Tessier wore black, like me, and we did not coordinate this. But when we met in the lobby of the gallery, the 4 of us stood together for a moment and understood, without saying anything, that we had dressed for the same purpose. We walked into the Great Hall together. The room was full of the kind of light that only the National Gallery does well, the way the ceilings lift the sound up in a way, the way the stone makes every voice quieter than it would be in any other room in the city. My son-in-law's mother was holding court near the entrance to the auditorium. She wore champagne silk. She saw me from across the room and her smile did not change, but I watched her register the women on either side of me, and I watched her not recognize either of them, and I watched the first small calculation pass behind her eyes. My son-in-law was near the bar. He saw my daughter. He started to move toward her. He stopped halfway across the room when he saw Adele Tessier. He turned, very slowly, and looked at the bar. My son-in-law's father was at the head table. He did not see me at all. He was talking to the chair of the Heart Institute. He was a man who, in his own mind, had not yet entered the part of the evening in which anything was going to be required of him. The program began at 8. The lieutenant governor spoke. The director of the Heart Institute spoke. A young cardiac surgeon spoke about a child whose life had been saved by research funded by the foundation. The room was warm. People were moved. People were the way people are at the National Gallery in November, when the snow is falling outside the windows and the wine has been poured and the speeches are still in the section where everyone is allowed to feel good about themselves. Then it was my son-in-law's mother's turn. She walked to the lectern. She did not need the steps. She took them anyway, because the photographers were on the floor below the stage and she knew her angles. She thanked the committee. She thanked her husband, who half stood and waved. She thanked her son, who did not stand. She spoke about service. She used the word integrity 3 times in 4 minutes. I counted. I had arranged, through the foundation's audio-visual coordinator, who was a young woman from Cornwall who had once interned at a firm I sit on the board of, for a particular video file to be queued and ready in the projection system, and for the standard branding loop to be paused on my signal. I had given the coordinator a sealed envelope 2 days earlier with instructions she was to follow only if I sent her a single text message with a single word. I sent the message at 8:17. The lights in the Great Hall did not go out. They dimmed by perhaps 30%, which is a different thing, a more theatrical thing, the way a hush moves through a room when something is about to happen that the room has not been told about. My son-in-law's mother paused. She looked over her shoulder. The screen behind her, which had been showing a slow rotation of cardiac research milestones, went black for 1 full second and then displayed a single line of white text. The truth about the woman who just spoke about integrity. The room did not gasp. It went still, which is what rooms do when they are full of people who have been trained their whole lives not to react in public. The screen advanced. The first image was a forensic report. Bryden Macaulay letterhead. The conclusion highlighted that the emails attributed to my daughter had been generated from a workstation in the Ashworth Holdings offices on Sparks Street on dates that corresponded to my son-in-law's mother's visits to her son. Signed by a forensic accountant whose credentials were listed beneath her signature. The screen advanced. The lease for the Sparks Street building. The numbered company listed as the registered owner. The corporate filings showing the ultimate beneficial ownership, which traced through 3 layers of holding structure back to me. The screen advanced. The line of credit. My signature, in a different capacity, as the authorized officer of the lending entity. The current balance owed to me by Ashworth Holdings as of close of business the previous day in 9 figures. The room began to make sounds. Not words yet. Just the sounds people make when they are trying to understand whether what they are seeing is what they think they are seeing. The screen advanced. 3 photographs. Ren McIntyre in 2014, Adele Tessier in 2016, my daughter in 2019. 3 engagement announcements from 3 Ottawa papers, each one showing my son-in-law with a different woman, each one within a window of 18 months of the last. Below them, 3 identical legal demand letters sent by the same lawyer for the return of the same type of asset for sums of money that varied only slightly. The dates lined up. The room was no longer still. Ren McIntyre stood up from her seat at our table. She walked to the steps of the stage. She climbed them. She stood at the edge of the lectern, where my son-in-law's mother was still standing with one hand on the wood and the other at her throat. "My name," Ren said, "is Ren McIntyre. In 2014, I was engaged to her son. I spent 11 months being told I was forgetting things. I spent a year afterward paying back money I had not taken. I have not spoken about this publicly. I am speaking about it tonight." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The room had quieted again, the way rooms do when a person standing at a microphone is saying something that everyone has agreed silently to hear. Adele Tessier walked to the stage. She climbed the steps. She stood beside Ren. She spoke in French first, then in English. She was briefer. She said her name. She said the year. She said the amount of money she had paid. My daughter walked to the stage. She did not climb the steps. She stood at the bottom of them, looking up at the 2 women already there, and she said in a voice that carried only because the room was quiet enough to carry it, "My name is on the firm's letterhead. The emails were forged. The forensic report is behind me. I am the 3rd one I know of. I do not believe I am the last." I stood. I walked to the front of the room. I climbed the steps. I went to the lectern. My son-in-law's mother stepped back from it without my asking her to. She had understood by then what the rest of the room was just beginning to understand. I looked out at the Great Hall. I have spoken at podiums in my life. I have given testimony. I have read eulogies. I have done none of it the way I did this. My name is Heather Ridgemount, I said. Some of you know me. Some of you don't. What I want you to know tonight is that the building this foundation operates from belongs to me. The firm being honored tonight operates on the line of credit that belongs to me. I have owned both for longer than most of you have known. The name Ashworth meant anything other than a name on a door. I paused. I let them hear it. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police Financial Crimes Unit received our complete file at 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon, I said. The Law Society of Ontario received its copy this morning. Bryden Macaulay's managing partner received his copy by courier at 6 o'clock this evening, while you were all dressing for dinner. I looked at my son-in-law. He was standing beside his chair. His hands were at his sides. His face had become the face of a man who has just understood that he is, finally, alone in a room he had always assumed belonged to him. You are a man with a pattern, I said. You have used your mother's reach and your father's name to break 3 women I know of. The pattern ends tonight. 2 officers in plain clothes entered through the side door. I had spoken with the staff sergeant in charge of the Financial Crimes Unit on the Tuesday. They walked without hurry to the head table. They spoke quietly to my son-in-law's father, and then to his mother, and then to him. None of them was arrested in the Great Hall. That is not how it works in this country. They were asked to come in for questioning, which they did, in the parking lot, in handcuffs that were applied only after they had reached the side door, because the officer in charge was a woman who had been at this work for 26 years, and she understood, the way I understood, that there is a difference between justice and spectacle, and that the most lasting kind of justice does not require spectacle, but does, on certain rare nights, allow for it. The room came apart into noise behind us as we walked out. I did not look back. My daughter took my arm. Ren McIntyre walked on my other side. Adele Tessier walked behind us with her head up. The snow was still falling on Sussex Drive. The cars were pulled up in a long line of taillights along the curb. 3 weeks later, I sat in the offices of a woman who runs the largest shelter network for women fleeing financial abuse in Eastern Ontario. I had known her for 20 years. I wrote a check from the foundation my late husband had asked me to start in his memory, the foundation I had named for my mother instead, because my husband had asked me to name it for whoever I wanted to name it for. The check was for $400,000, which she told me would fund their legal advocacy program for 5 years. I told her it was a beginning. My daughter moved her things out of the house in Rockcliffe Park in December. She and the children stayed with me through Christmas. By February, she had taken a position as senior counsel at a firm I do not own a piece of because she had asked me, very specifically, to make sure of that. She is good at her work. She has always been good at her work. She has always been good at her work. Ren McIntyre and Adele Tessier and my daughter have a standing dinner once a month at a restaurant in the Byward Market. I have been invited twice. I have not gone. It is not my dinner. On a Tuesday morning in late January, I drove back to the Tim Hortons at Bronson and Carling. I parked where I had parked that day in November. I sat in my car with the engine running and watched the parking lot for a long time. There was nothing to see. A woman buying coffee. A man with a tow truck. The sky was the same gray it had been that day. The snow that had fallen since had been pushed into hard ridges along the edges of the lot. I thought about my daughter at 7 years old, holding my hand in the lineup at the bank in 1990, while I had explained to a manager I was 20 years younger than that I needed a line of credit and that I was good for it. I thought about the woman that manager had been, who had given it to me, and who had told me, on my way out, that she had a daughter too. I did not cry. I have not been a woman who cries easily, and the older I get, the less easily I cry. But I sat there for a long time anyway, with my hands on the wheel and the heat blowing on my face, and I let myself feel the full weight of what had almost happened to my daughter and her children, and what hadn't. Then I drove home. If you are watching this, and something in it has recognized itself in your own life, I want you to hear something I needed someone to tell me. Years ago, when I was young, and I did not yet know that the world was going to require me to learn how to wait. You are not imagining it. You are not too sensitive. You are not the problem. The person who is telling you that you are forgetting things, that you are misremembering, that you are not thinking clearly, is telling you a story about yourself that is not true. And the longer you live inside that story, the harder it becomes to find your way out. You do not have to wait for someone like me to find you in a parking lot, the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment, the Assaulted Women's Helpline, the shelter network in your own province, the lawyer at the legal aid clinic at the courthouse in your town. They are all there. They are waiting for your call. You do not need permission to make it. My name is Heather Ridgemount. I built what I built quietly, over a long time, in a country that does not always make room for women who do not raise their voices. What I built held because it was never in only one place. It was in paperwork. It was in patience. It was in the kind of attention you pay when you have decided, a long time before anyone has noticed, that the people you love are not going to be left in a parking lot in November with nowhere to go. This is rare revenge. We don't shout. We don't beg. We build and we wait. And when the time comes, we are ready. I have thought a great deal, in the months since that November evening at the National Gallery, about how a person gets to be the kind of woman my son-in-law's mother had become. She was not born cruel. No one is. She had made small choices year after year that had cost her almost nothing in the moment, and that had cost the people around her everything in the long run. She had taught her son that a woman who notices things is a woman who needs to be told she is forgetting them. She had taught her husband that the door with their name on it was the same as the building itself. And every time the world had not corrected her, she had grown a little more certain that it would not. That is the quiet arithmetic of how a person becomes the kind of person who forges another woman's emails on her son's office computer and goes home and sleeps soundly. It is not a single decision. It is the sum of 1,000 smaller ones. I have thought, too, about my daughter, who at 41 years old had begun very slowly to mistrust her own memory. She is not a weak woman. She has never been a weak woman. But she had been told gently and persistently by the person she had chosen to share her life with that she was not quite who she thought she was. And there is no strength of character that can protect a person over years from a story told to her every day by someone she is trying to love. That is not a failure of will. That is what we are. We are made, in part, by who is speaking to us when no one else is listening. What I want to say to anyone watching this, particularly any woman past 60 who has spent her life being told that her patience is her weakness, is that patience is not weakness. Patience is what you do with intelligence when the moment is not yet yours. I waited 6 years. I waited because waiting was the only honest thing to do. I did not act on what I suspected in 2019 because suspicion is not the same as evidence, and I will not destroy a marriage on the basis of what I sense in a room. I waited until they moved, and when they moved, I was already in position. Be the woman who is in position. Do your reading. Notice what you notice. Write things down. Keep your own counsel, even from the people who love you, because sometimes love is what asks you to look away. The world will tell you that you are paranoid. The world will tell you that you are catastrophizing. The world has been telling women that for a long time, and the world is, on this particular question, almost always wrong. I am 63 years old. I built what I built from a paralegal certificate and a daughter who slept in a dresser drawer. If you are watching this and you are afraid that you have run out of time, you have not. You have only run out of the part of your life in which you were waiting for permission. That part is over now. The rest is yours.